Let's go.
Excellent. So welcome to Taking Liberties, a very special edition of the show. So basically we're just doing an addition to our regular show to talk with Zeev, who anybody who watches this show will well know as one of our regular guests. He has written this fantastic article for Catalaxy Files.
I thought it's Catalaxy.
Oh, yeah, okay. Catalaxy Files. On the changes that are happening, or proposed changes to bail laws after the Burke Street massacre, where a guy drove his car, a guy who was on bail drove his car through a crowd and killed some people. So, Zeev. Well, firstly, welcome to Taking Liberties again.
Thank you.
And why don't you begin by telling us, because there's lots of people who rabbit on about bail laws. And I should also mention that Vickers is here, just in case anybody was aware. And we should also say sorry for the technical problems with the video. Skype has changed.
Can I also mention that this is also being recorded live, and I accidentally said it as public. So I just posted on Facebook if people want to join and watch it. They can watch us do this live. So
you can see us at our most unprofessional, which is really saying something. So anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand. Bail laws. Zeev, explain to us what bail is for. Why do we have it? People get very upset about how bail operates, especially if you listen to Talkback Radio. So why don't you go through kind of the theory of bail laws and then kind of maybe a little bit about kind of how it's executed in real life?
Sure. Well, bail laws in practice differ from state to state and nationwide and indeed internationally. But generally, bail historically has been a basic rule that means that when you're suspected of an offence and when the police charge you with an offence, you're then released into the community because you're not actually proven guilty of that offence yet until there's been a trial that's determined your guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So that's the basic principle. But the thing is that not everyone gets bailed. And traditionally, at least, people get refused bail because the person responsible for deciding bail, and that's either a magistrate, which is a judge basically, or a bail justice, which is a member of the community. That's in Victoria at least. They decide that the accused poses an unacceptable risk to the community, so they shouldn't be released on bail because even though they're presumed innocent before proven guilty, the fact is that their criminal history, their record, and the evidence of their guilt is so strong that, frankly, they shouldn't be let out again because they just pose a danger to the community. They're going to reoffend. They're going to do it quick, and it's going to harm everyone. So I think for libertarians or for people generally, it's a balancing act between letting people go when the evidence is unclear, when it's their first offence, or second perhaps, or when they've had a history of mild offending and suddenly do something serious. These are all questions that people perhaps haven't given much thought to, but basically what the law does is say, look, if you're a low-level offender, the attitude of the courts is going to be relatively lenient to low-level offending. Low-level as in shoplifting or suspicions about a pub brawl or something. A pub brawl happens, everyone sobers up. The likelihood is that they will return to work the next day and they will not be, out there on the streets committing brawls day after day after day. So that's the basic idea. And I think it's encapsulated in this idea that we shouldn't lock up innocent people for things they may not have done, frankly. And even we shouldn't lock up people who just don't belong in jail, even though they're guilty. And again, the pub brawl assailants who sober up the next day, they've learned their lesson, they'll never do it again. is the classic example. And I guess the difficulty with that, of course, is that you then get into the situations we have now in Victoria and elsewhere, where people get very, very unhappy when people with long criminal records, including very serious ones sometimes, get released on bail. And sometimes they also get upset because small-time offenders get released on bail and do awful, terrible things. The Burke Street killer was a small-time crook. He had a rap sheet of an alleged theft and a lot of dangerous driving and one alleged assault, none of which had been proven guilty. He'd been proven guilty of. He hadn't actually been to trial. He hadn't entered a plea, nothing. So the fact is, he may well have been guilty of some of those things, but none of them really suggested that he would go out and commit mass vehicular murder the next day. They suggested he was a terrible driver and a small-time crook, right? So I guess my point is people overreact a lot when people commit offences on bail, but if we started locking up everyone who committed, a bunch of bad driving and shop theft or punched someone in the face once, well, our prisons would swell in size, but I don't think our community would be that much safer. And that's what essentially these reforms are about. They're about making it harder, much harder, really, for people to be bailed. They're about reversing the onus. So right now, it's the police need to show that you're an unacceptable risk before you will be remanded into custody, imprisoned. And what will happen is that will be reversed if you're accused of certain various offences. For example, a home invasion, which is basically people rocking up into your place and demanding your things. It's more serious than a burglary. It may or may not be armed. It's certainly a terrible thing to do. I admit that. But the fact is that the fact that you're accused of it doesn't necessarily mean you did it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be locked up in for a year or 2 or 3 on bail, or in prison awaiting a trial that, may result in you being proven innocent, or may result in a finding that, look, this is your first offence and you deserve another shot, or a second offence and perhaps you could still have a chance of rehabilitating. I mean,
do you have any idea of roughly how many people are out on bail at any particular given time?
Goodness. Hold on. Because I've spoken a while there, and I hope I've given you a good overview. But if you have any other questions, good Lord. Do I have any idea of how many people are on bail?
Well, I mean, is it tens of thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands? What sort of broad sort of scope?
I would say it's certainly in the thousands or more. I wouldn't go so far as to say the perhaps in the low tens, but I doubt it.
Okay.
I don't have the data on hand, but I mean, people. There are a fair amount of people charged with an offence every year. I mean, we can look it up. Number of people bailed every year in Australia, and if the data is there.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose I just wanted to jump in here.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, I sorry, I can hear myself coming.
Yep.
From your laptop there, Zeev.
I can hear you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can hear myself.
Headphones, because that might make it easier.
Yeah, sorry, I was just getting distracted. But sorry, from my perspective, and I'll let him get the headset on first. Sorry, from my perspective, basically it's I want to say the slowness of the court system that really sort of warrants the need for bail, right? Like the entire concept of bail is you've been charged with something, but while you've been charged with something, it hasn't been proven that you're guilty, and it's been determined that you're safe to walk around in society, despite the fact that you've been charged. If the court, I don't think bail laws would really be necessary. But
if justice were swift, yes. But the fact is that trials can take half a year or more, and that's time that people just get put on hold. Well, you have a job, sorry, you can't just go away for half a year or a year. You've lost it. And in the meantime, you're in prison and with a bunch of criminals next to you, perhaps. And prison is not a nice environment. There's drugs, there's crime, it's dangerous, and people can come out much worse than they came in. That's another point that these bail restriction advocates really overlook. You could really turn someone who's a low-level offender into a much more serious offender, or an innocent person into an offender,
by just putting them in that situation.
People in prison.
I mean, they do often.
If you put people in prison who don't belong there, they will become worse. And we see the crimes that people commit now, but we're not seeing the crimes that the people we're going to imprison because of these changes are going to commit in future.
I mean, I've heard the expression that that prisons are basically the university of the criminal world. So I was just saying, like, perhaps I'm sympathetic, I guess you could say, to the argument that a lot of these bail revocation advocates, I think that's what they're called, or what are they exactly called? Bail revoking advocates?
Bail restriction advocates. Let's just call it that.
Okay, so bail restriction. I'm sympathetic to their argument that, there's a lot of people that would be let out that maybe shouldn't. But at the same time, they're not really looking at it from the perspective of the actual, what is bail in response to? And the response is basically the inefficiencies of the court system in being able to tackle these cases.
Absolutely.
And that's something that probably needs to be addressed at a much wider scale than I suppose it is. And to anyone who's listening who probably is fitting into that category of, I'm someone who wants to restrict the number of people bailed and all of that, I would suggest you tackle the issue of the inefficiencies in the court system as a matter of redressing some of the concerns that us as libertarians would have.
I mean, you'd have to say, though, there's a certain, I mean, you think about a serious, like, something on the more serious end, or you imagine there'd be situations where the cops can't immediately get all the information that's needed. It might actually be, even if you had an efficient system that you didn't have delays in the actual process of getting them into a court, getting them a court date, it's still possible that somebody can spend a month in prison just waiting for the cops to get all the information together, to find all their witnesses, to get all together. And I think of myself, like, if I was in...
Sorry.
Finish, Vickers?
Yeah, sorry.
Like, you think about a lot of the people who are going to get caught up in the court system, they're not going to have lots of resources on hand to be able to wait out not having a job. Like, if I were to lose my job for a month, like, if I was to be in prison for a month and lose my job and not work for that month, I think I'd be in pretty dire financial straits. And I think, and I'm pretty well off compared to some of the people who are going to be coming through the courts. So,
And I really have to emphasize this. About 10%, 11% of the people who go through the courts get acquitted or have the charges against them withdrawn. Okay, that includes people suspected of violent offences. Okay. I'm speaking from personal experience as a solicitor acting for clients accused of violent offences. Their offences get withdrawn like any other, and that's because sometimes the evidence against them is just weak. And that does, police charge people sometimes when the evidence is mixed or weak or just bad. It happens. Police are not perfect.
Right.
Exactly. But to your point where someone could be waiting for months and months and months while the police get their shit in order, I'm of the opinion that the police shouldn't be given that kind of leeway. If they don't have a case, if they don't have something they can bring to court in a set amount of time, they should not be arresting someone.
Well,
No, I think
because
it's
that's a fair comment, but bear in mind that the process of preparing these police briefs, I mean, that might take a month or two, but the courts are really the cause of the delay, in the sense that there's only so many judges to hear these cases.
Yep.
The fact is, you know, if you hired more and more courts and more judges, maybe that would be going some way towards it. Although those are all very expensive, but I suspect that, I mean, the evidence really to bring someone to trial is there within 2-3 months in most cases.
Mhm.
So the delay is really because of the procedure of the courts. Okay, you have things like an initial mention date.
Mhm.
Everyone turns up. Does the accused want to plead guilty? Do the cops want to withdraw the charges? Everyone has a nice chat. They turn up before the judge after the chat and say, we want to withdraw. We don't want to withdraw. The next mention date happens. Everyone takes it a little more seriously than they did the last time because they couldn't agree the last time.
Yep.
Essentially the same exercise, except this time they schedule it for trial, get witnesses, say which witnesses they're going to bring, and all of that. And then another thing for the trial itself. That's just a Magis court case, but that can be 6 months. You know, Supreme Court even longer.
I'm seeing enormous inefficiencies here. I'm sitting here and going, listening to this and going, like, we live in an age where, so I can transfer vast amounts of data from my computer to another computer in a matter of minutes. I can order something online in a matter of seconds, and I'm sitting there and going, and you're explaining to me there's something that seems very simple logistically needs to take months, right? And from what you described, it's literally just people meeting. And to me, it seems that the entire, if that's what's the holdup, there needs to be some sort of system set up to review this and on how can we make this faster.
I would just mention it's not just people meeting, it's a magistrate getting involved after the end of the meeting. You turn up before the magistrate and say the accused is pleading guilty, and then you enter into a plea and that ends it, or you'd say the accused is pleading not guilty for now.
That seems like a 15-second task.
Yeah. Oh, usually it is. That part of it is, but there's a massive amount of people before you in line. I mean, and sometimes, yep.
I was going to say, it's probably worth pointing out that whenever the government tries to have some sort of IT, let's cut down the bureaucracy and use IT to create all these efficiencies, every time the government tries to do that, whether it's a state level or a federal level, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars and they completely screw it up and it never works. So, you know,
like there have been some improvements.
It'd be nice for these things.
Yeah.
That should run smoothly. In a wonderful world, they would. But like, I was
going to say, Lee, before making broad stroke statements like that, just remember e-tax has been it's saved the government $400 million just this year.
Sure.
And it's been one of the best running programs for like the last 10 years. And it's saved the government hundreds of millions of dollars every year. I will agree with you. There are projects which aren't involved in the general day-to-day processes of the government, which turn out badly.
Yeah, like they tried to do an HR type, combined system for a bunch of government departments at a federal level. It costs like $1.3 billion, and they scrapped the whole thing.
Yeah.
And they spent $400 million in Western Australia trying to do the same thing.
Correct. Yeah. So there are really good examples of that, but like where it's where it's something where the process is really, really defined, like for example, collecting taxes, or in this case, like hearing a court. It's actually something you can actually step in there.
Maybe
the process is defined. You can actually do it quickly.
To some extent, because yes, the courts do need to update themselves to account for new technologies, and the criminal law courts are no exception. That's true. The commercial courts have done this a little more quickly. They are a bit more up to speed, but certainly the criminal law courts are well behind. Anyway, but that's
a separate. That's a side document.
That's a side point.
Yeah.
Look,
we should get to maybe explain what Matthew Guy wants to do, because it's Matthew Guy, correct? His proposal.
Well, not just Matthew Guy anymore. In fact, it's the Victorian Labor Party and the Victorian Liberal Party that want to introduce bail restrictions, and
bipartisanship. Yay!
Yeah, exactly. Well, unfortunately, that's
Yeah,
the case.
unfortunately,
Now, the Liberal Party wants to take it even further. They want to restrict bail even more than the Labor Party is now wanting to restrict bail, which means even more people in remand. By the way, remand is prison. That's
Yep.
all it is. You get to wear casual clothes while you're in remand. What a great freedom they offer you there, wearing casual in remand. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that Matthew Guy's also pushing mandatory minimum sentences for second-time offenders in the case of serious offences. However, and I would note that these serious offences include things like home invasions, which again, it's a terrible position to be put in. There are more of them now than ever, but the fact is these are what you would call, in part, an economic offence. The fact is, it's I'm not here to get the violin out for the criminals, but it's a product of criminals robbing people for money, and if we look at it, it's an awful thing to say, but if we look at it, really, crime is an occupation, something that they're doing for money, and one thing we need to do really is to take a step back and say, hold on, why are people doing this for money? What is stopping people from getting a legal job in this country? What is stopping people from pursuing getting a job or a career, and instead they're being pushed into crime. Now, I mentioned this in the article as well, but most people who are criminals, career criminals, or even low-level criminals, they're unemployed. Now, if we look at the data for unemployment, I mean, the amount of unemployment in this country is extraordinary. If you look at it, not the unemployment rate, but if you take a look at the youth unemployment rate, plus the people who have given up entirely on looking for work. By the way, the unemployment rate only counts people who are looking for work, right, but haven't found it. The youth unemployment rate in this country is about 25%. That's including the cities where employment is higher, right? In the country, I imagine in the US. In practical terms, what that means is that you have a massive cohort of people, a small minority of whom are going to be more likely to enter into the crimes. And I mean, from my perspective as a libertarian, and I guess this is a libertarian podcast, well, there are ways of getting people into employment. There are ways of getting people a career and a job and education. I mean, these are regulatory barriers at the end of the day that they're facing to getting work. These are low-skilled people, uneducated. That they may not stand a chance against a uni student if they're both going for the same job for the sake of argument. But if you lowered the minimum enough, yeah, maybe some employer out there might give them a chance for a few dollars an hour, and then they grow with experience and time and get more. And that would really offer them a starting point for a legal career. The other end of it, of course, is that crime is actually very profitable because of drugs. Selling and buying drugs and violence to do with drugs is actually a major part of our criminal system. A lot of people go to jail because they're taking drugs. A lot of people go to jail because they're selling drugs. A lot of people go to jail because they're beating each other up over drugs. And again, from a libertarian perspective, if you legalized a lot of the drugs that are being sold there, marijuana or the more serious ones, cocaine or heroin or meth, ice, yeah. Well, you suddenly don't have drug dealers going to jail because drugs are sold in pharmacies or what have you, and no one really minds. Well, I mean, of course, drugs might still be a serious issue because people face, the medical problem of addiction, and they can get aggressive or violent perhaps if they are in the wrong environment. But the fact is that's the same with alcohol.
Yeah.
And yet we don't lock up alcohol addicts, and we don't lock up alcohol shops for selling alcohol either. We just have to recognize that the people who are in the worst of these scenarios need to be treated as a medical or psychiatric problem, and they should get help and move on in that way. And in that way, I mean, we'll free up a lot of prison resources, I'll tell you that much. There'll be far fewer prisoners, far fewer criminals, and my goodness, there'll be far less crime.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to the issues around, criminality and the impacts being a career criminal has on your life. I was listening to a podcast just today about Peru, where they have, it's so incredibly difficult to start a business. It's so incredibly difficult to just do about anything, building a home, whatever it is, that everybody does it illegally. Well, one of the impacts that has is you can't use a bank account, because it's not like if you're making tons of drug money, you can just start putting it into a bank account, because they're going to be like, well, where's this guy getting his money from? He has no job. You think about getting a loan from a bank. If you want to build a home or buy a car, like a work car, or if you want access to credit, it's not like you say, oh yeah, I want this credit card to help me facilitate my cash flow issues. I've got this drug business on the side. You just can't do that. So there's all sorts of issues
Australia
around.
too. You're right. And in Australia, I mean, it's obviously much easier to open a business in Australia, but at least for people like, drug dealers or what have you. I mean, the idea that they can then re-enter the workforce after they have a conviction against them. Well, actually, it's much harder for them to do that, because with a conviction against their name, someone who's may find it difficult or impossible to, become an Uber driver or what have you. But who would really care if someone sold marijuana and became their Uber driver? I ask. I mean, do you feel threatened by that? I
don't know. I'd probably be wondering what their contacts and quality is like.
You'd be wishing they could deliver drugs to you using Uber, wouldn't you? You'd be like, why can't I get weed on my Uber app?
Oh, right.
I mean, not that I
love with the
weed,
ice cream. You get the ice cream delivered and with the weed.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I guess, certainly occupational licensing, and to some extent also Uber's own policies, because they have a clean record policy too. But that's a different story. But certainly occupational licensing can prevent people from pursuing careers, because if they have a conviction against their name, even if it's for something ridiculous like selling weed, well, suddenly they have to explain themselves and take the time to say, well, I promise I won't do it again. Those plants, they just forced me into it, Your Honour. Anyway.
And you're talking about a group of people who already have issues with self-control. I mean, the kinds of people who get drawn into this life are not people who can go through to year 12 and study well and then go into a trade or go into university. These are people who already have self-control issues, who've already got probably family backgrounds. It's a generational issue often. So they've already got a crap start, and then you're just piling on all this other stuff that doesn't need to be there.
It's just making life much worse for them. And unfortunately, the assumption seems to be that if you're young and you've committed crimes, well, you're just one of those young hoodlums, and you should be locked up. 2 offences, my goodness, that's 10 years. Can you imagine a 15, 16-year-old going to prison for 10 years? I mean, I'm not saying that what they've done is right. I am saying, though, that a lot of them have rehabilitated. A lot of them have walked away from crime, and we should be encouraging that. We shouldn't be filling up our prisons, especially with people who don't belong there. Prison is a place for violent and serious offenders. It is not a place for anyone else. People who can't rehabilitate, frankly. And there's, by the way, there's a lot of data to suggest that prison is actually not a very good way to deter crime, because the main thing that deters crime is the prospect of getting caught. Okay, if you get caught, you're going to be hit with some punishment. Okay, but exactly how much, you're never really sure. Okay. But you know that it's going to be bad. You're not going to. You know that you're going to be hit with it, and you'd want to avoid it. From the criminal perspective, right? You want to avoid that. Okay. If you increase the chances of being caught, you decrease crime.
Yep.
dramatically.
Isn't this what happened? This is the Dutch experiment, if I recall correctly, because the Dutch are currently in the process of closing a whole bunch of their jails because they've decriminalized a whole bunch of things, which were economic, mostly what you would call economic crimes.
Perhaps, Vickers. I also know that in, I believe it was either Norway or Sweden, a similar thing happened when drugs were decriminalized there. And they also have a remarkably good record with their prison system and its recidivism rate, partly perhaps because they do tend to focus quite vigorously on rehabilitation. But then again, it's comparable to our own, so maybe that's not a factor. But certainly their prisons are, the number of people going through the system is going down because they've decriminalised drugs. They haven't legalised them, but that's another point.
Yep.
Anyway.
Well, I think we've probably covered that one probably about as extensively as we can. Is there any final thoughts you have, Zeev, about this particular topic?
Yeah, final thoughts. You're seeing the criminals, and they're awful people, and perhaps on the particular facts of any particular case, maybe it was a mistake to release these awful people who we've seen on the news every day. But what we're not seeing is how people will be locked up when they're innocent. Low-level offenders will be locked up when they don't deserve to be there, and the system will churn out a lot of future criminals released back into the system, into the public, and endangering us all. So, yeah, those are my final thoughts.
All right.
It's not making us safer. It's making things worse.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks very much for all that insight, and we'll put a link in the comments for the YouTube video and in the show notes for the podcast for the link to the article that Zeev wrote at Catalaxy Files. Did I say that wrong again?
No, you got it right. Catalaxy.
Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us again, and we'll be back on Monday with our regular show. So yeah, please subscribe, like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes and whatnot.
Yep.
Right.
And I hit the stop